Okay, this is a video on our last topic for Chapter 6, which is systems of linear inequalities. So I want you to think back to Chapter 5 when we graphed linear equations. We would graph the y-intercept, apply the slope, draw the line, and that would be the solution to that linear equation. And I want you to think back to Chapter 3 when we graphed single variable inequalities like x is less than 7. We would put an open circle on 7 or a closed circle, depending on whether it was or equal to or not. Then we would shade to the right or the left, depending on whether it was greater than or less than. So we're going to take those two concepts from chapters 3 and 5, and we're going to put them together for this chapter 6 concept, which is, again, systems of linear inequalities. So we have linear equations, but instead of an equal sign, they have an inequality. We're going to graph them the same. So this is the example that's on your chapter 6 handout, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. So we're going to look at this first inequality. Y is greater than or equal to negative 2/3 x plus 4. We're going to graph that. We're going to go down to the graph here. We're going to go up to the intercept of 0, 4. You can see it's going to be the blue line. We're going to apply the slope down to right 3 or up to left 3. There's our line. It's going to be a solid line because if you look at the inequality, it's a greater than or equal to right here. That or equal to means that the line itself is part of the solution. So we need a solid line. Then you notice the greater than part there. That tells us where we shade. So we're going to shade above the blue line because that is where y is greater than those values. And I want you to look at the second linear inequality. Y is less than 2x minus 1/4. So we went to 0, negative 1/4, just down here, this red intercept here. Then we applied the slope up to right 1, up to right 1, up to right 1. You'll notice the red line is dashed. The reason it's dashed is in this inequality, there is no or equal to. That means the line itself is not part of the solution, so I have to use a dashed line. Now I have to shade, so I'm going to shade where y is less than that line I just dashed in there. It is less than below, so I go to my red line and I shade below. I shade down, right? Shade down from that line. Okay. So this is the result of graphing those two linear inequalities. You see, again, the blue line here, greater than or equal to, solid line because it's or equal to, shade above because it's greater than. Then we have our dashed red line, the equation inequalities right here. Negative 1/4 was the intercept. Dashed because it's not or equal to. Shade below because it's less than. And because we put them on the same graph, just like we did our linear equations, we put these linear inequalities on the same graph. And where their shading overlaps, this area right here, is the solution. Meaning, if I took an ordered pair from any of this, from this area at all, so if I went 7, 4, for example, or 6, 4, okay? And I plugged that ordered pair into either one of these original inequalities for x and y, I would get a true statement. That is the solution to a linear inequality, a system of linear inequalities. Now there's a note on your note page here. When we're doing story problems like you will on your chapter 6 test, you have to identify x and y in words, and then once you have them identified, you're going to set up your two inequalities. That says equations, it should be inequalities, okay? You have to set up your two inequalities, and how you solve them is you graph them, right? And a lot of times on a story problem, you're just going to be in this first quadrant. So how I'm going to show you next week is that we're going to graph these story problems using just the intercepts, which we did when we did standard form in chapter 5. So that's just kind of a preview of what we're going to be working on Monday or Tuesday. And then your chapter 6 test is Wednesday.